Good afternoon and welcome into Sports Talk on a Budget. It is Sunday, October 13th, year of our Lord 2024. Special one here. As I mentioned on the last show, I was going to do like a Sunday afternoon reaction to this one's just going to be a college football reaction. I'll get into a little bit of an NFL reaction in a couple of days here, but wanted to react. Obviously, yesterday was a big Saturday, kind of the Saturday everybody circled going into the season as the biggest of the season. October 12th, everybody had that circled on their calendars. And it did not disappoint. It definitely did not disappoint. All the big time matches we had lived up to it. They were all great. A couple that didn't exactly live up to it, but for the most part, great Saturday, great results. So going to react to this. Going to go game by game here by some of the top games. Give you my reactions and just some of my thoughts about what happened in the game and just what could be going forward for these teams. But before I do that, of course, just going to remind you to like and subscribe right down here on the show under Sports Talk on a Budget. Leave a comment. Give me some of your reactions to some of the games we saw yesterday. Unbelievable day of college football. It's been an unbelievable season of college football so far, and we're still only about halfway through. And then if you prefer the audio version, of course, you can find it on places like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or basically wherever you get your podcast. But let's go ahead and dive into the show today and get a look at some of the big games we saw yesterday and get a reaction there. So just kind of a programming kind of a footprint here and kind of a note. One of the games I am not going to react to from yesterday is going to be the Penn State USC game. I'm actually going to have a show tomorrow night with my brother. It's going to be a little bit of a USC rant. If you've watched or listened to the show, you know that I'm a USC fan. Not happy about the result yesterday, especially how they started off the game to how they finished the game. So we will react to that game, and I'll give my full breakdown of what I saw in that game tomorrow night with my brother in our USC rant. Talk about Lincoln Riley and just the state of the USC program. So I would not be getting to that game. So if you were looking to see or hear about that game, just give it another day. I will get that out tomorrow night, most likely. But I will react. There was so many other big games. Where we're actually going to start is in the Big Ten, and a new Big Ten versus an old Big Ten team, just like in USC and Penn State. But we're going to start with the Ohio State at Oregon game. And wow, that one was billed as the biggest game of the weekend, and it lived up. It was definitely one of the best games of the weekend, if not the best game of the weekend. What an unbelievable game there. 32-31. Oregon wins at home over Ohio State. And going into this game, my question marks were the defensive side, or at least the defensive front for Oregon versus the rushing attack of Ohio State. And the rushing attack of Ohio State, that two-headed monster of Trevion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, I thought they would have a lot of success on the ground with those two and then get some running plays from Will Howard. But that wasn't really the case. Henderson had an pretty good game. Judkins was basically not a factor in the run game. Howard had some decent runs, a touchdown run as well, but that wasn't the case today. Oregon's defensive line, I will tip my hat to them. They played really well in the defensive line, and they made this Ohio State team more of a one-dimensional team throwing the football. And Will Howard is a good quarterback, but that's not his forte. That's not what he does. He is a good thrower of the football, and he's a good throwing quarterback. But he's not C.J. Stroud. He's not even Justin Fields when he was in college. He's not a guy that you're going to be like, okay, we're going to throw 40, 50 times if we need to get the victory. He's just not that kind of guy. And he had some kind of mistakes there, had some issues throwing the ball from time to time, but he still ends up with over 300 yards passing, had a solid game. I will get to that last play decision and that last drive decision and kind of just the ineptitude there a little bit, but Will Howard played well. He was a question mark for me as well. We haven't really seen him be tested as an Ohio State Buckeye. We saw him at Kansas State, and he kind of was okay in big games, but he showed out, and he had a pretty good game. Dylan Gabriel, to me, had a really good game. Dylan Gabriel, 341 yards passing, 10-yard average, 2 touchdowns. He had a 95.9 QBR, so he had a solid game. He really showed out. He really plays well in these big games. Remember Red River last year against Texas, had a really good game. And then this game, basically the same day of the year, same weekend almost, against Ohio State, he has a really big game. And the thing that I wasn't anticipating from this Oregon team was the passing attack. Because I knew about Tez Johnson, I knew about Evan Stewart, but we really hadn't seen them have really big games or good games so far this season. But they erased that yesterday. Tez Johnson goes for 7 catches for 75 yards and a touchdown. And Evan Stewart, the transfer from Texas A&M, who really hasn't had much of an impact on the season so far, had a huge impact last night. 7 receptions, 149 yards. That's 21.3 per catch and a touchdown. So he was saving his best for the best, biggest spot and best game. So that was huge there from Oregon. And this Oregon team, they did what they wanted to do. Now, they probably could have put a lot more points on the board, had a couple missed field goals, had a turnover on downs in the red zone. So if you look back at the game, they actually controlled the game on the offensive side more than Ohio State did. And that is something that I did not think would happen. The defensive line for Oregon stepped up, played really well. The offensive line for Oregon stepped up and played really well. Let no sacks up against that front with JT Tuimoloau and I'm blanking on the other guy, but either way, what we thought was a stout defensive front from Ohio State. Maybe it's not, but what we thought, and I still think could be a stout defensive front for Ohio State, was not able to get home on Dillon Gabriel on this Oregon offense. And that's why Oregon was able to move the ball up and down the field. Like I said, could have put more points on the board, had missed opportunities in the red zone. This could have been even a bigger spread. But let's get to Ohio State. We're going to look at just the result for this team. Everything's still in play for Ohio State. I think they dropped to 4. They went from 2 to 4 in the standings. Road game, tough environment. You lose by 1 when you probably should have had a chance to kick a field goal to win the game. So you're not going to drop very far. But these big games are becoming a problem for Ohio State and Ryan Day. Ryan Day is 1-4 in his last 5 games against top 5 opponents. Of course, that's coming against Michigan teams. That's Oregon. His lone win was last year against Notre Dame. So this could be a problem because at Ohio State, and now with the money that they're spending in NIL, they're expecting him to win these games. And Michigan should be an easy win this year for them. We'll see what happens. It's a rivalry game, so there always is things that could happen, but that should be an easy victory. They're going to go to Penn State in 2 weeks, and that could be an interesting game. They usually have owned Penn State of late, so that shouldn't be too bad. But still, maybe Michigan has fallen off as kind of the bully on the block in the Big Ten. And Ohio State was supposed to take over that mantle of the bully on the block in the Big Ten. And in your first opportunity, you go to the team that everybody was measuring you against at this point in Oregon. Because, like I said, Michigan has fallen off, so it's Oregon and Ohio State that are measuring sticks right now. You go on the road to them. You had an opportunity to win this game, multiple opportunities to win this game. You do not seal the deal, and that just seems to be the narrative right now in Ohio State. I fully expect him to probably win out, be back in the Big Ten championship game, and probably in the playoff. But here's the thing. At Ohio State, you're not playing to get into a 12-team playoff. You're not playing to play in a Big Ten championship game. Yes, those are good accomplishments on the season. But you're playing for national championships. You've dropped millions and millions of dollars on this team and on this program to be a national championship team. And I still believe that they are, but these big games are adding up now, and it's getting more interesting. We'll see how they do down the stretch. I think they'll beat Penn State and Happy Valley. I think they'll probably handle Michigan. They actually have Indiana the week before Michigan, so that might be a more tricky game than the Michigan game is. But like I said, I still fully expect this Ohio State team to be there and to be a factor when it counts, but they got to start winning some of these big games. They got to start winning these top 5 games more consistently to really be taken more seriously on a top-end level. And that last sequence, so you have the offensive pass interference on Jeremiah Smith. Ticky-tack call, didn't love the call, but you could see that he definitely pushed off. Looked like he was being held a little bit, kind of got the defender off of him. Don't love that call in that spot, but you don't have the presence of mind. You don't know that since that was a penalty called on the field of play and it wasn't out of bounds, the play didn't go out of bounds, the clock is going to continue to roll. So you lose a ton of time there. You can't use your last timeout. And then Will Howard, you can't do that. That looked like Nico Iamaleava last week against Arkansas. You can't run, and if you're going to run, you got to get down sooner. You got to get down sooner, or you got to go to the sideline and get out of bounds. You can't slide in the middle of the field with 1 second left because you didn't get a first down, so that clock does not automatically stop. So the clock is going to continue, and that's what lost. That's what ended the game for them there. Now that would have been a tough field goal. Their field goal kicker was pretty good. That would have been a tough field goal there, probably about a 48 to 52-yard field goal. But still, you still would have given your kicker and your team an opportunity to win, and that didn't happen there. Veteran quarterback and Will Howard, you should know better than that, but just to look at this game as a whole, I fully expect both these teams to be around again. We'll probably see this matchup again, most likely in the Big Ten championship game. Now, teams like Penn State, maybe even Indiana, maybe they have a little bit to say about that and try to shut that down as the narrative. But as of right now, these are the two best teams in the Big Ten, and you'd be hard-pressed to find two better teams in the country than these two teams right now. And then let's move to what was a great nightcap on a Saturday night. Not exactly the nightcap because there was a game that was still going on that finished after it. But I'm going to move to Ole Miss at LSU. And that's number 9 Ole Miss at number 13 LSU. LSU wins in overtime 29-26. And this was back and forth. Now, Ole Miss had kind of controlled this game for the most part. They pretty much had the lead throughout all of regulation, but they let LSU hang around. Let them hang around. You end up selling for field goals in the red zone, have turnover on downs in the red zone. You let this LSU team hang around in their stadium. And you can't do that. You cannot let this LSU team hang around in their stadium with Garrett Nussmeier on that offense that can get going at any time during the game and really look lethal. And that's what happened at the end there. And hats off to Garrett Nussmeier. He kind of had an up and down game, had a couple of turnovers, but to come back on that last drive, pick up a couple of fourth down conversions, that last touchdown that sent it to overtime basically was a fourth and 8, 4th and 7, 4th and 8. I gotta check that again, but huge play by Garrett Nussmeier and Kyron Lacy there. Or so no, that was Anderson that scored the game time when Kyron Lacy scored the touchdown in overtime to win. But huge play there by Garrett Nussmeier and this offense for LSU. And as you saw in this game, now I know there was 26 points on the board, but last year this game was in the 40s and 50s. So the defenses for both of these teams are improved. Now, the offenses, you can argue, aren't as good as what they were last year. I mean, Jaden Daniels, Brian Thomas Jr., and Malik Neighbors for LSU. I like Garrett Nussmeier and their offense. They ain't that. So maybe you can argue a little bit that the offenses aren't that. Quinshon Judkins isn't there anymore for Ole Miss, but still, I still think that both the defenses are improved. You can see what Blake Baker, the defensive coordinator for LSU, is doing there. They're starting to buy in a little bit more. The defensive line and defense for Ole Miss is better too. So better overall offensive. Remember, it was 29-26, but this went to overtime. So going into overtime, this was 23-23. So that for a full game with these kind of talent and athletes on the offensive side that these two teams have, that's actually not bad. That's not bad for these defenses with the talent that these teams have on the offensive side. So 29-26 is the like I said, is the final there for LSU. Garrett Nussmeier ends up with 337 yards passing, 3 touchdowns. Yes, the 2 interceptions, but still a solid game and was great down the stretch on that last drive to send it into overtime, and then had that big, I think it was the first play of overtime, maybe first or second play of overtime. Boom, goes deep to Kyron Lacy, touchdown, ball game, LSU wins. And LSU is a team. They lost that opener in Vegas against USC, but they're still a team that has a lot in front of them. They're 5-1 now. I believe they're 8 now in the new AP poll. So they're a team that still has all their goals in front of them. They have a kind of a tough stretch coming up. They go to Arkansas, as we saw. That's not as easy as we thought it would be, since we saw what we saw with Tennessee last week. They go to Texas A&M. So that's going to be a difficult game. Texas A&M is an improved team there and seems to be getting better and better under Mike Elko. And then they host Alabama. So that's their next. So they have a bye in between there, but that's their next 3 games is at Arkansas, at A&M, home for Alabama, and then they go to Florida after that. But we'll see what's kind of left of Florida at that point, even though they fought really hard against Tennessee last night. But still, everything's on the table for LSU. SEC championship still on the table. Their only loss is out of conference, so they're undefeated in conference right now. playoffs are still on the table for LSU. And then, of course, I mean, maybe we need to kind of table that for a little bit, but the national championship could still be on the table for LSU. This is a team that's getting better on defense every week, it seems. Their offense still has the firepower to kind of score with almost anybody in the country. So this LSU team is trending in the right direction. And like I said, they have everything in front of them right now. And so this is going to be a big next 3 games for LSU. If they can come out of that with maybe just 1 loss and still be a 2-loss team, they could still have everything in front of them, because that's a tough stretch. At Arkansas, at A&M, and then home for Alabama. Alabama does not look like the Alabama that we know, so we'll get to that a little bit later. But LSU, like I said, everything's still in front of them. On the other side, Ole Miss, a lot of people were talking about this game going into this game as kind of an elimination game as far as playoffs go. And I think that was true, and I think that's true with Ole Miss. Because now Ole Miss, not only do you have 2 losses, you have 2 losses in conference, so you're way behind the 8 ball as far as the conference standings, and you still got to go to Arkansas. You still host Georgia. You still host Georgia, and you host Ole Miss. I mean, you host Oklahoma in a couple of weeks. We'll see. Oklahoma has really sputtered on offense. We'll get to them in a minute here, but Ole Miss hosting Georgia still. 2 losses in conference. You don't have any really signature wins. Your best win is on the road at South Carolina, which is a decent win as of right now. So Ole Miss is on the outside looking in right now, and they're a team that I think is going to have a hard time getting back into the playoff mix. So that might have been a playoff eliminator game last night, with LSU being the team that goes forward, was still a great playoff chance, and Ole Miss probably not so much. But still, great game there, 29-26 in overtime. What a great game there. What a great scene in Death Valley at LSU. Obviously, that's always a tough place to play. So Ole Miss was a 3.5-point favorite. I actually rolled with LSU's plus 3.5, so I like that pick there, and I hate that pick. But still, great game by both teams. Seems to be an eliminator. LSU is definitely in the playoff race, in the thick of things there. Ole Miss is not done technically, but their margin of error they don't have any margin of error anymore. They have to win out, and they kind of have to look pretty good winning out as well. So it's going to be tough sledding for them to get back into the playoff mix, but LSU is right in the thick of things, in my opinion. And then we'll stay in the SEC, and new SEC teams at least, and we'll move to the Red River rivalry, Red River shootout, whatever the hell you want to call it. Texas, Oklahoma, Cotton Bowl, Dallas, Texas State Fair, one of the best games every single year. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case this year. Texas kind of just messed around all game and still won. And still won handily. Still won by 31 points. They kind of just messed around, did their own thing, and still won by 31 points. They had 400 yards of total offense to 239 for Oklahoma. Oklahoma has 148 passing yards and only 91 rushing yards. Oklahoma is a one-dimensional team, and that one dimension is is defense. They can't do anything really consistently on the offensive end, and Texas, you could tell, knew that. So Texas, yes, they sputtered early and kept Oklahoma alive and kept their hopes up alive early on with Quinn Ewers' 2 early interceptions. But once they started getting going in that second quarter, they scored, they scored 3 touchdowns in the second quarter. Halftime, it's 21-3, and it was done. It was a wrap. You could make a case that at 14-3, it was a wrap. So Texas, it was a weird game. Didn't really watch too much of it because it was at the same time as Penn State USC, which was the much better game and obviously the team that I like to watch. So I had it on the second TV, kept an eye on a little bit. But Texas, like I said, kind of just played around the entire game, knowing that, okay, when we need to go score, we'll score. And when they need to go score, they're not going to be able to. They just don't have the firepower. So not a great showing from Oklahoma, of course, and it's going to be tough sledding down the stretch for Oklahoma. But let's get to Texas. So Texas wins 34-3 in the Red River shootout. Now they welcome in Georgia next week. Huge game, of course. Texas, to me, I still think is a cut above every team in the SEC. Yes, I think they're a cut above Georgia, Alabama, LSU, Ole Miss. I think they're a cut above right now. But we'll really see that this Saturday in Austin as Georgia travels down to Texas. So it was good for Texas to not really be tested too much in this game against Oklahoma when you have Georgia coming into town. Like I said, they messed around for an entire 4 quarters and still ended up winning the game by 31. If they really wanted to, they probably could have dropped 50 on Oklahoma. But Oklahoma's a good defense, but still not a great defense. But either way, Texas-Georgia game next week is huge. I'll get into that in my previews and pick show later in the week, but that'll be a huge game there. And Texas, other than that, they go to Vanderbilt, so obviously that's nothing to sneeze at or nothing to scoff at anymore. You welcome in Florida, that should be a victory. You go to Arkansas, that'll be a charged environment. That's kind of an old rivalry, Texas, Arkansas, old Southwest Conference days. We saw that back in 2021, that game. That was a charged environment for Arkansas, so that's not going to be a walkover for Texas. And then Kentucky comes to town. That should be fairly easy for them. And then the big one at the end of the year, the first time this has been played in over a decade, and this was a big rivalry in Texas. Texas at Texas A&M in College Station. That'll be a big game there, and that could be kind of Texas A&M's last stand to get into the playoffs or maybe even into the SEC championship game. So a lot more to play for Texas. They're 6-0 right now in the season, number one team in the country, and they were ranked number one today as well in the new AP poll. One of the best teams in the country. Like I said, I think a cut above all the other elite teams in the SEC. We'll see exactly if that still is the case this Saturday as they welcome in Georgia. Oklahoma on the other side, it could get real, real rough for Oklahoma going forward. They welcome in South Carolina. They probably should win that game, but South Carolina is a solid team. South Carolina was a team that almost went to overtime and could have went to overtime with Alabama yesterday and gave Alabama all they wanted. Then they go to Ole Miss. That's going to be a tough road game for them. Go to Missouri, welcome in Alabama, go to LSU. So this could be a struggle for this team to be a bowl team in Oklahoma. They're 4-2 right now, so that's a good start for them. But down the stretch, I don't see a lot of victories. Yes, they play Maine. That should be a victory. But South Carolina at home's no guarantee. Missouri on the road, of course, is no guarantee. Alabama at home, of course, is no guarantee. And then LSU on the road. Like I said, this could be a struggle. They're going to get a fifth win with Maine coming to them in about 3 weeks. But it could be a struggle for this team to really get to 6 wins to get to that bowl game. So it will be interesting there. And you got to get to at least a bowl game in Oklahoma, and you got to do better than that. But still, Brett Venables, year 3, not a lot of progress, especially on the offensive side. Needs to maybe pull a couple upsets, maybe on the road at Missouri, on the road at Ole Miss, or even at home against Alabama. Needs to pull a couple of upsets at the end of the year to maybe kind of get that seat a little cooled down. But like I said, not a great Red River. I've seen, obviously, of course, a lot of better Red River games, but we saw in that game a team flex their muscles and show that they're one of the best teams in the country in Texas. Even when they probably play their C+, B- game, they win handily against a decent opponent. Not a great opponent, a decent opponent. But still, let's stay in the SEC here. We're going to look at other teams and other results I wanted to talk about. Alabama survives at home 27-25 versus South Carolina. Georgia goes on the road, wins at home 41-31 over a 1-5 Mississippi State team. And then Tennessee survives at home in overtime versus a team right now that is 3-3 in Florida. 23-17 was the final there. So wanted to talk about these 3 teams because they all seem to be in the top 12 right now in the AP poll. I'm going to say this right now. I don't care if it gets pushed back. Alabama's not a top 10 team. I don't care. And Georgia's not a top 5 team. Georgia is not a top 5 team in the country right now. Alabama's not a top 10 team in the country now. And you know what? Tennessee might not be a top 12, 15 in the country right now. And all of these teams, and this is what bothers me sometimes about the current state of college football. The SEC has dominated the last 15, 20 years of college football. I understand that. But they've also been given a leg up every single year. And you look at a game like the Red River Shootout. Texas beats a number 19 Oklahoma team 34-3 in that game. No one in the country should think that Oklahoma was a top 20 team even going into that game. And somehow that's a ranked victory, and it's a big ranked victory, so that's a feather in their cap. And then everybody's going to be like, well, Florida-Tennessee is a rivalry game. I don't care. Florida's not a good team this year. You are at home. You should win by more. You shouldn't have to go into overtime against a not good Florida team who's probably going to fire their coach at the end of the year, if not before the end of the year, if things really go south. And then you look at Alabama. You don't bounce back great after that loss on the road at Vanderbilt, and you sputter throughout the game and almost blow the game at the end by giving up that onside kick to South Carolina. And then Georgia. Georgia kind of handled Mississippi State for most of the game, which they should. Mississippi State is the worst team in the SEC right now. And you let them score 31 points on you. You give up 31 points on Mississippi State at home. So all three of those teams have tests. You have the Alabama-Tennessee game next week. That'll tell us a lot about both of those teams. And then you have Georgia going to Texas. That'll tell you a lot about Georgia there. I don't like that matchup for Georgia in that game because I just don't like what their offense or defense is really doing at this point. But still, these three teams were all ranked highly, especially Alabama and Georgia, to start the season. They've only really beaten teams in their conference of note, and they stick around in the top 10, in the top 5, in the top 12 because of the brand and because they beat each other. And that's what happens every year in the SEC. They get about 8 to 9 ranked teams to start in the top 25. They beat each other, so they don't fall that far back because they beat each other. And it's like, oh, well, they beat another ranked team. Oh, they play another ranked team. Oh, it's a tough environment. Auburn's a tough environment, even though they've lost 18 home games in the last 5 years. So I'm a little tired of the SEC bias. I think the top end of the SEC outside of Texas is not great. When you look at teams like Alabama, Tennessee, and Georgia, I think they're good teams. I don't think they're great teams, and I think they're extremely flawed teams as well. So I don't want to hear about, okay, well, the SEC is going to dominate this league. If they dominate the playoff, hats off to them. But I don't see that happening with the teams that they have at the top. Like I said, their teams are extremely flawed. Poor performances and poor efforts by all three of those teams yesterday. Yes, they all come out with a victory, and at the end of the day, that's all that matters. But still, poor performances and poor efforts in that game, in those games yesterday. And then I'm going to finish off with going to the Big 12. Big 12, we're going to start off with Kansas State at Colorado. Kansas State wins 31-28 at Colorado, kind of asserts themselves back as one of the top dogs in the Big 12 after that loss a couple weeks ago to BYU in Provo. So Travis Hunter got hurt in this game. Shiloh Sanders looked like the liability he is and the kind of Nepo baby that he is, playing and starting for Colorado, and would just look awful on defense. Avery Johnson looked like he got injured for a little bit, missed some plays there. There was kind of a weird result that happened there, but still, good win for Kansas State. Go on the road, you win a conference game. And to look at Colorado, Colorado's still alive in this Big 12 race. They're still alive in this Big 12 race, but right now the teams to talk about in the Big 12 are not Colorado and Kansas State. They are Iowa State, BYU, and Texas Tech. Iowa State goes in to Morgantown and beats West Virginia 28-16, and West Virginia got a touchdown at the end of the game that with a minute 10 left in the game, and it was 28-10. So Iowa State dominated this game, dominated time possession. They were the better team in this game, and they showed it. They moved to 6-0 for the first time in a very, very long time. And they are right now probably the best team in the Big 12, but right behind them is BYU. And BYU at home hammers Arizona 41-19. They dominated in all three facets. They dominated in offense, defense, and special teams. They look like a really good team. They have a good quarterback play with Jake Retzloff there. They ran the ball fairly well for 147 yards, threw really well on the as well, so 250 yards there with just an opportunistic team. They had turnovers there. They ended up getting a couple of turnovers from Arizona. Arizona is not a good team this year. They were overranked coming into the season. But still, this BYU team is a team to reckon with. And right now, at the top of the Big 12 conference, you have three teams that are undefeated in conference play. Iowa State and BYU, who are undefeated overall, and then Texas Tech, who is undefeated in conference play. And Kansas State's going to be nipping at their heels right now. Like I said, Colorado is still in this. Arizona State is in this. Utah looks like they're out of it after losing again on Friday night, and Cam Rising looked awful. He needs to just retire. Just go away. Just go away. We're done. We're done with you, Cam Rising. You had your fun a couple of years ago. Last year, you were injured all year, and then this year we had to deal with the injuries again, and you looked absolutely freaking awful Friday night. So go away, Cam Rising. We're done with you. Go away. So Big 12 is still wide open. Still a lot of teams at the top there that could make some noise. But there's some teams starting to separate there. And we thought this would only be a one-bid league, and I still think it will be. But if Kansas State, Iowa State, and BYU can continue to win, and even Texas Tech to a certain degree, maybe they can sneak in a second team. If Kansas State beats Iowa State at the end of the year there and then loses to them in the conference championship game, maybe they get another team in there. Maybe BYU runs the table a little bit and gets them in there. They don't all play each other, unfortunately. I don't have the schedule right now in front of me, but they don't all play each other, unfortunately. But Iowa State does play Kansas State in the last regular season game of the year. That's going to be a big one there. But a lot to see and a lot to like from the Big 12 conference there. And now we starting to see some separations, but some separation from some teams, but still a lot of other teams kind of still alive in this race right now. Let's just kind of give it a look. So in the Big 10 standings at the top, you have, or not in the Big 10, the Big 12. At the top, you have BYU, Iowa State, and Texas Tech all tied at 3-0. Then you have Kansas State, Arizona State, Cincinnati, Colorado, and West Virginia, although I don't think West Virginia is much of a threat after what I saw from them yesterday, all tied at 2-1. And then you have a lot of teams at 1 and 2 that are probably out. But I would say Iowa State, BYU, and Texas Tech are obviously in the driver's seat. Kansas State, Arizona State are right behind them, but don't forget about Cincinnati and Colorado as well. So still a lot to play for in the Big 12, and we've seen some good results from this conference. A conference like we've talked about, maybe not the best conference, but maybe the deepest conference and definitely the most fun conference. But that was kind of just my reaction yesterday. Clemson looked really good after hammering Wake Forest. They're starting to kind of flex their muscles in the ACC. But that was kind of just my reaction to some of the big games yesterday. Excuse me. And wanted to get that down. Like I said, tomorrow night I'll have a special show with my brother, kind of a USC rant as we rant about our team and talk about Lincoln Riley and just the state of that program. And we'll react to that Penn State USC game. So that's why that wasn't a part of my reaction show today. But either way, this is Sports Talk on a Budget. If you like the video version, please like and subscribe right down here to the video version. Leave a comment with some of your top reactions from the day yesterday. And then if you prefer the audio version, it is available on places like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or basically wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for watching and listening, and have a great day.